go ahead and take a glance.
Square. Good guess, but wrong.
Right, so that's Bill Murray. And in this scene from the movie Ghostbusters, he keeps zapping that poor guy because he's trying to impress a pretty girl. Ghostbusters was a major blockbuster movie, and I wonder how many of you all knew that that scene was inspired by a real-life experiment. In today's talk, I'm going to tell you the quick story of that experiment, and I'll explain the horribly negative results that society typically gets from it. Then I'll turn all that on its head, and I'll show you that the cup is actually half full. And lastly, I'll explain how you can use this knowledge to your advantage. This is really a fascinating story, and it's particularly appropriate for the Silver Fox Advisors. So let's go ahead and get started. This is Stanley Milgram. This is the social psychologist who conducted the experiment I'm about to describe. He was the second of 3 children in a working class family in the Bronx, and he ended up doing his graduate studies at Harvard University. After getting his PhD at Harvard, Milgram accepted a position at Yale University, and I'm sharing all of this to explain that Milgram operated at the world's highest level of education and examination. So it is worthwhile to take a look at what he accomplished with his experiments. Okay, so this is where it gets interesting. This is a picture of people accused of acts of genocide at the World War II trials in Nuremberg. Milgram saw that almost all of the accused defended themselves, saying they were only following orders. This really struck Milgram, and he wanted to answer these questions. How far would someone go to obey an instruction that hurts somebody else? Can everyday people be influenced to commit atrocities? Do people consistently do things that are not in their best interest when they confront certain situations? That last question is one I explore in my own book. This talk is, in fact, giving the details behind a short little story in my own chapter 7. Okay, so to answer those questions, Milgram devised a sneaky experiment. You're looking at the ad that he placed so that he could get some volunteers. He offered to pay them $4 and another 50 cents for car fare. You know, this was a compelling amount of money back in those days. Here's what the experiment looked like. There are 3 people, the experimenter, the teacher, and the student. The experimenter and the student were actually both actors. They had a script, and the teacher was the only unsuspecting paid volunteer. In fact, the experimenter in his scientist lab coat costume would introduce the paid volunteer to the other actor as if they both were volunteers. And then they would draw straws to see who would be the teacher. But of course, every time the actual paid volunteer was the teacher. That person believed he could have been the student. In his view, it just happened to be that he was selected the short straw and became the teacher. So here's a photo of that student actor looking like a volunteer, getting strapped into a convincing fake electric chair. The 3 people were in 2 separate rooms in the Yale Interaction Laboratory, and the paid volunteer could not see the student actor on the other side of the wall. This photo shows us the unsuspecting teacher who has what appears to him to be an electric shock generator with a lot of switches and buttons. His job was to test the student actor through an intercom, and when the student got something wrong, he had to shock him, just like Bill Murray did in the movie Ghostbusters. This is the contraption the paid volunteer operated. What's more, he had to increase the level of shock each time. Okay, there was no actual electrical shock, but the volunteer thought there was. Those switches went from 15 volts, labeled a slight shock, to 450 volts, which the teacher saw labeled as danger, severe shock. And of course, the student actor gave mainly wrong answers on purpose. Milgram's actors had a script so that every interaction with every new volunteer was exactly the same. So here's an example. If the unsuspecting volunteer refused to administer a shock, or if they said anything to question the process, the experimenter, this is the authority in the lab coat standing next to the volunteer, the experimenter would give these specific statements on this slide to prompt the teacher to continue. This script was literally the only thing the experimenter would say, and only in this order. If the paid volunteer continued to resist after that fourth prod, then the experiment was done. Now, there was another script for the student acting on the other side of the wall, and that one is a lot more interesting. Here is what every paid volunteer heard that actor say. After the student got something wrong on purpose, the volunteer would progressively shock them and it would get higher and higher. And they'd finally hear things like, ugh, or hey, this really hurts. But it progresses. At 150 volts, the fake student starts to say things like, I have heart trouble. I'm quitting. Get me out of here. And they say it convincingly. Now, when I read this the very first time, I had the idea that this 150 volt level would be the point where I probably would have stopped. And I wonder how many of you feel the same way as me. The guy on the other side of the wall is saying that he quits, he has heart trouble. Doesn't that seem like the point you would stop shocking him? We will definitely come back to that Chris would have stopped at 150 idea. But the script continues. As you read through this, imagine hearing it. Imagine a convincing actor in another room yelling fearfully that their heart is bothering them, shouting and begging to get me out of here. Imagine the volunteer who, after 195 volts, hears just one more wrong answer and has to hit the 210 volt shock. This is still the same experiment. Milton's scriptwriter needed to be ready for that rare person who might go this far. Notice at 285 volts, the student isn't even saying anything coherent anymore. He's just screaming in pain. Now, it's fake pain, but the volunteer doesn't know that. And when I saw this the first time, I really believed that no volunteer would actually get to the 300 volt level. The person is just screaming and saying they have a heart condition. No one would get that far. That was my expectation. Okay, here is the end of the script and the end of the experiment. Take a look at how this works. At 345 volts, and then again at 435 volts, the student doesn't answer at all. It's just silent. So the poor, unsuspecting volunteer has to shock them because no answer is a wrong answer. And then if they actually were to get to this point, the paid volunteer continues to ask questions and shock this unresponsive learner 3 separate times at the highest level of 450 volts before the experiment is finally over. Milgram and the actors did not think anyone was actually going to get to this point, but this is the script. It's what they were prepared to do. Okay, let's share the results. Here's a pie chart that shows volunteer after volunteer, experiment after experiment. The majority of teacher volunteers continued to the highest level of 450 volts, despite all the signs they were seriously harming, maybe killing the person on the other side of the wall. More than 50% of the time. The red part of this pie chart is when the experiment was terminated by the actor in the lab coat because they didn't have any more script after those last 3 silent shocks at 450 volts. But you and I, we wouldn't be in the red, right? We're in the blue. Or at least I thought I was, because I imagined I'd have stopped at 150, back when he said he had heart trouble and he quit. You remember all that screaming at 285 volts. You and I definitely would not have gone past 285 volts. this next slide is really depressing because sadly, that's not what the data says. Every single participant continued to 300 volts. This isn't a pie chart. It's just one color. Every single person went to at least 300 volts. Milgram carried out 18 variations of this study with large groups of volunteers and effectively concluded that ordinary people are highly likely to follow orders given by an authority figure that they believe in. And they follow those orders despite the morality or their values. To say this another way, with the right catalyst, untrained, unprepared people are extremely predictable. And that is why if every light turned green at this intersection all at the same time, most people would have a car accident. That light is seen as an authority, but not everyone would crash at an all green intersection. For example, many federal agents attend a driving school where they are taught to see those stoplights as predictors and guides, not as an authority. And they'll run the light or they'll drive up on the sidewalk if they have to catch the bad guy. But without that training, without that preparation, we see the lights as appropriately telling us what to do. You know, how many times have we stopped at an intersection in the middle of the night when nobody else is around and yet still there we sit? This is a major tenet in my book, The Prepared Investor. You know, whether we are hitting the brakes to stop at a useless red light or selling the stock of a perfectly good company or electrically shocking an innocent human being, the vast majority of people will press the button if they're given the right environment. The bottom line here is that a particular catalyst inspires a particular result. If we believe in the structure of the system, if we believe in our role, in our responsibilities, and ultimately in the authority of the person giving orders, then most people are going to do what they're told and press that button. And that can be terribly pessimistic. Milgram wrote in his article, The Perils of Obedience, the extreme willingness of adults to go to almost any lengths on the command of an authority constitutes the chief finding of this study and the fact most urgently demanding explanation. So psychologists can continue to try to explain this, but how about if you and I just accept it? Let's say the glass is half full instead of half empty. In that case, the question changes. The question becomes, who or what is your perceived authority? Because you can choose. If we accept that we're predisposed to do what someone in charge says, then put someone in charge that tells you to do things that are good for you, that support the goals and the values that you have. This is why the coaching profession exists, both in the athletic and the business world. It's what explains how an Olympic athlete, arguably the best at their particular sport in the entire world, how they would actually take instruction from somebody else who cannot possibly perform at the same elite level. They listen to their coach. This is why I think the offering provided by the Silver Fox Advisors is so incredibly valuable, and why I'm proud to be speaking on their behalf here today. According to the Houston Business Journal, I lead one of the city's largest investment firms, and these are some colleagues of mine. Each of these professional financial advisors invest for their clients, but when the engagement is operating at its best, the client receives guidance and coaching far beyond the gain and loss numbers. But your guide doesn't have to be a financial advisor or a silver fox. You could formally pair up with a pastor, a parent, a teacher. Really anyone you trust. The point is, you have to believe in the system, believe in your role, and believe in their authority and their guidance. By the way, a great method to ensure that you truly do believe in your heart of hearts, a great method is to pay them. Here's a second more important tip. You're looking for people that you know you're going to listen to when they tell you something you don't want to hear. There are successful professionals who take this so seriously that they've surrounded themselves with a board of advisors, people with different complementing expertise. And these professionals don't make any major life decisions without consulting them. So in conclusion, I've described an experiment that uncovers a pessimistic social truth. I've reversed those findings and showed you how you can get your basic instincts working for you right now. You want to get very good at saying, let me run that by my coach, or I'll decide after I consult my advisory team. We're proven to have this in our nature, ladies and gentlemen, so take advantage of it. I think we have time for questions. This call goes a bit longer, and some of you might have a question and some of you won't, but everyone has a cell phone. And so I really hope that you will please pull out your cell phone right this moment. Do a post right now on LinkedIn or the social media of your choice. We're all trying to have more exposure online, and this is a great opportunity for that. There are example posts on this slide. You can tag me or whoever invited you to attend this talk, and that will help get your post a little bit more attention. And while you're doing that post, I'll mention as a final thought, my firm is looking to hire. We have a specially designed program for stay-at-home moms who have a professional background and would like to re-enter the workplace in a meaningful career helping others. So if you know someone like that, please ask her to connect with us. And with that, I'll formally end by saying that I deeply appreciate your time and consideration here today. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris. I'm going to let you leave that slide. Oh, well, maybe not. I was going to say you can leave the slide up. Unless it's part of the thought experiment and we're all going to get zapped with 450 volts.
No, happy to share it.
And also to encourage people this is different than our normal format. We don't utilize the chat room in the same way. We don't do social media, and I think it's a good exercise to partake in. I don't have any formal Q&A questions so far. I've got a thumbs up, looking great, and some warm thoughts, but mostly we have people posting things in the chat about their contact information, but nobody has any questions yet for you. So I'll start it off as the role of the host that can't seem to operate the sound on the video. Good job on that Ghostbusters video too. So in addition to the idea of having a coach who you listen to, it's kind of counterintuitive though, right? So if you're the best in the world at what you do, let's say a professional athlete, why would you hire somebody that isn't as good as you and then listen to them and surround yourself with people like that? It seems very counterintuitive, as opposed to what's more obvious is let me follow orders because I was told to do something and I trust that person is correct. How do you trust somebody that isn't as quote unquote qualified as you?
Well, it's a different answer for each person. And that's where we go back to, do you believe in your role and do you believe in the structure of the system that you're in? That Olympic athlete, they would never take instruction from me. There's no way. It doesn't matter how much I try to tell them that I have something meaningful to share. I'm not qualified in their mind and neither in my mind. But they have in their idea and their training and experience in the sport, they have an idea of what is needed from their coach and what is expected from their coach. And when they select that person to fill that role, it's now starting to look a lot like the experiment that Milgram conducted, where they have a role, they have a job, and separate from that job is somebody telling them what to do. It's just that they're telling them to do the thing that they want to do, as opposed to there's somebody telling us to do something that we don't want to do. We didn't have time, I think, for all of the information about the teachers in that experiment. But as a quick summary, almost every one of them had major problems emotionally as a result of the experiment. Sweating, really difficult for them to press the button again. And those prods that you read, just those 4 simple statements was all it took to, keep them going.
Well, as you can imagine, in addition to asking questions about how to select a financial advisor or coach, we've also got the requisite, what should we be doing in the down market today? So that question's posed to you, Chris.
Sure. Well, so the down market today question it's an odd one to get right now, and I'm really happy to hear it, because most people are talking about how the market is so high, and they're talking about how their portfolios are a bit larger than, for example, the summertime last year. So hearing about what to do in a down market, that says to me this person is looking ahead. We're also looking ahead. The next move is a down market. It can't go up forever, and there's a lot of things that on our team that we're worried about, from relationship with China to the Fed's extended powers to the value of the dollar. There's a number of things, our national debt. But to give a quick, short answer to what to do in the down market is to prepare for it right now. Know that it's coming. And so what can you do to prepare for it? Maybe you have an advisor and you want to have that conversation with them, or you don't, and you might want to do some reading or do some real thought-provoking written exercises alone with yourself about, what is your reaction to your portfolio changing in value? What is your reaction to the income that you're getting from the portfolio changing? Be ready for the down market. This need to prepare, I think, is really overlooked on Wall Street. It's the catalyst for why I wrote the book that I wrote. The story that we hear so often is, stay the course, don't make changes. The crisis is here. You don't want to rock the boat. It'll pass. We'll get through the other side. This is a common story that we've all heard. But when you really look at what is happening with the market and how these crises, different types of crises, affect it, the story is much more in depth and a lot more interesting. And you can prepare. Absolutely, you can.
We got two follow-up finance questions in the Q&A. The first is, what's your view of the GameStop debacle and the way it was instigated on online platform? Is it a sign of the times? Is it a concerning emerging trend? And the follow-up to that is now the time to add some bonds to your portfolio?
Okay, so the first question about GameStop. So I don't think that it's a disturbing trend to me. I think that our system is set up to be an auction style market. It has been, that is no change. When people all have the same idea about something, it will inflate, create a bubble. And then when they change their mind, they might be left holding the bag, and things deflate. That is a part of the system. The ups and the downs, we create it as more and more of us start thinking the same way. When there's good discourse, when there's a lot of differing opinions, then you see that market volatility not being so bubble-like. But the concept of, we all think that the .com technology is the way to go, and I want to get into tech, and I got to get into tech. Many of the viewers of this webinar, they remember the tech bubble. The GameStop was it's focused on one single stock. Maybe there was a little bit of a political side to that. There was a few other stocks, I think, also that were a part of it, but it's not disturbing to me at all. I like to see that the system works. What does bother me is that there was a shutdown of the system, and I think that is still being looked at. That's something that I hope that a light really gets shined on, because if we're able to do our transactions and the system is operating with the liquidity that we expect, that's good. Whether or not there's a lot of people buying and pushing it up or selling and pushing it down, that's not a problem. But it is a problem when I buy in and then I'm told I can't sell. That's a problem. And that is something that I think is not going to just get shuffled under the rug. We'll continue to hear about that and probably see some action associated with it.
Fantastic. So the next set of questions are asking about the coaching in your talk. The first one is, how have you picked your coaches, and what advice do you have for individuals to evaluate the veracity of a coach?
Yeah, well, so my very first honest to goodness coach in life, where I had selected them and they were willing to work with me, was my first battalion commander in the military. And the reason that I am in finance was because of his guidance. I presented to him what options I thought I had, and he explained to me that there were more options on the table than what I was aware of. And with his help, I was able to get into finance. This is back in the late 1990s. Over the years, for me, I think it's been my own desire to help people. It gets returned to me, and those relationships turn into a real affinity, a real respect for their expertise, and a real desire to be useful to them. And you see that vice versa. And I think that if you're looking for, that kind of more organic relationship with your coach, the best way to do it is to be focused on a daily basis with helping others and seeing where the help gets returned. But if you have no coach in your life right now at all, I really urge you to consider reaching out to someone who this is what they do for a living. They collect payment and they pay their bills off their ability to successfully guide people to where you want to go. They've helped other people accomplish what you want to accomplish. I think you don't want to wait for the months and the years it takes to organically make it happen. If I didn't have a coach right now, that's exactly what I'd do. I'd end this call and go through my Rolodex and try to find the few people that are in the coaching industry, interview them to see if they've helped people accomplish exactly what I'm trying to accomplish. And when there's a good match, hire them.
So one of my fellow Silver Foxes, Doug Thorpe, is asking a leadership question. He says, Chris, to what experience do you attribute your views of leadership? And can you expand on the brand of leadership that you see as being most effective?
Right. So for me, all of my leadership training began at the United States Military Academy at West Point. Those were formative years for me, age 17 to 21. It's hard to let those thoughts and habits go. But then, another 6 years in the Army, going from lieutenant to captain in various jobs, that was really helpful for me to learn about what really motivates people, what happens when you, when you drop the ball as a leader and how does it come back to you. And it was a really good learning experience. So that's where the majority of my leadership training comes from. But now, I've been in finance for over 20 years, and I think I'm learning from the people that I work with. At Merrill, they recognize me as somebody to put in front of other financial advisors, and I traveled the country talking with thousands of financial advisors to help them to grow their investment advisory practice. And when I opened up my own shop and surrounded myself with professionals, like-minded professionals, what's come to be is, I am among leaders. And I mean, just this morning, I was talking with one of my colleagues about, how impressed I am, and I'm learning from him, and the lessons just don't stop. And so maybe that's off the cuff here. Maybe that's my most important side of what it means to be a leader, is to be open to learning, to continue to learn. The environment is always changing, and the way that people react to leadership is different today than 20 years ago. Your second question was, you had said, what was the background on leadership, and what was the second part, Joseph?
Can you expand on the brand of leadership that you see as being most effective?
Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think having that open mind to learning, to where you don't have all the answers. Oh my gosh, you don't have all the answers. And that's the whole point that I think Milgram's experiment helps to uncover, is that even if you think you have all the answers, we're predisposed to behave as though someone else has the answer for us. So it takes some energy to pretend like you've got it all figured out. It's much better to accept your nature and realize that you don't have all the answers. So that's the one thing, would be to be learning. And then the other thing I think is what I mentioned before about trying to help others. I've heard a lot of phrases about leadership through service, leadership through presence, a servant leader. I think all those phrases kind of talk to the mentality that I'm trying to convey.
Fantastic. I'm going to turn you back to the world of finance. I'm going to group a bunch of questions together. The first one starts off with the crystal ball question of the future. It also includes things like, do you see cryptocurrency as part of your asset accumulation and storage strategy? Precious metals. Let's see. This one's very specific on a GME story. T2, moving from T2 to something shorter. Is it better to invest in manufacturers or installers of electric charging stations? That's it for now, but I think that's plenty to work with.
Yeah, sure. Well, I'll start with the one that I think is the most prevalent. What we hear a lot about is digital currency, and Bitcoin is usually what comes to mind, and that's probably appropriate. It's the most prevalent of the different digital currencies that exist today. So our professional approach to digital currency right now, and these things can change, as I just said, environments change, but our professional approach to it is that there is too many cons to consider a digital currency as a major part of a portfolio design. Now, that's the fancy way of saying, if you want to dabble in digital currency, I mean, why not? Go for it. You're dabbling. That there are some serious cons to the equation, but at the same time, a lot of people are getting on board, and there could be upside there that you could get a little bit of a profit. But when I talk with folks, the things that I want to make sure that they're aware of when it comes to digital currency is that the main draw of something like Bitcoin is that there is a finite amount of it. There's a point where there won't be more Bitcoin created. Mined is the proper term. And when that happens, that's the amount of Bitcoin that exists. And so it's lauded as a finite commodity that would be a great hedge against inflation. Well, the problem with that is that while there is planned to be a finite amount of Bitcoin, there is an infinite amount of other potential digital currencies. So I might not be able to get a hold of a Bitcoin, but there's a lot of other competing digital currencies that, as time goes on, they're going to, they're going to have their moment in the sun as well. And so that idea that it's rare is a very tough one for me to espouse. For folks that are more traditional minded and they think of gold as that hedge against inflation, I think that is still where we are as a shop. We're a very conservative money management shop. We still think that if the portfolio requires that kind of hedge, we would prefer to use gold as the form. And even then, we're not doing anything. 50% of the portfolio is gold. And I hope that anyone listening doesn't think that I'm giving specific advice, but just philosophically speaking, we lean toward gold as a useful commodity to hedge against inflation. And we're still really intrigued by Bitcoin and how people are using it. And I think when you would see a shop like mine using Bitcoin or investing in it, it would be because a country's government has put some real serious backing to it, or that there's regulation that makes it a lot more predictable.
Fantastic. As a quick follow-up, one of my fellow Foxes has asked, Dick Hendy's asked, what market segments do you see benefiting from the money the government is putting into the economy?
Yeah, well, the typical answer to that is usually infrastructure. What I think, if you go to one of my industry's conferences, you'll hear a lot about, don't miss out on the infrastructure boom. The government is going to be, putting money to work in a way that construction companies and materials and equipment companies, that they're going to rise. The hard part about this is that when you've been doing this for a while, you can start to see a pattern of like it's too simple. The pattern of, oh, it's a Democrat in office, so that means these things are going to happen. Oh, it's a Republican in office, that means these things are going to happen. And I'm not sure that that is always the case, but I am sure that if anyone that was listening to this, if they thought, oh yeah, that makes sense, I've heard that, or oh sure, my advisor has talked to me about that. Well, you can bet that this is already priced into the market then. I mean, buying today into the areas that are typically talked about for for the government putting money into the economy, that's probably already priced in. To mention another side of this that I don't hear too many people talking about, there is some real problems right now with the U.S.-China relationship. And China's island building in the South China Sea, it creates a foundation. I'm not saying that we're going to war. I certainly don't want to sound like the sky is falling, but there's a foundation here for conflict that cannot be ignored by anyone with a real interest in global affairs. My classmates from the academy, these are West Point graduates. They've now been in the service. Those that stayed in, they're now 1-star generals, 2-star generals, and when I'm talking with them, the only thing that they are interested in is U.S. China and crypto security issues. I mean, that's it. If it's not cybersecurity or China, then maybe they're doing something fun like the Space Command or something. But those are the two big things. And so, thinking about that, just the other day we were looking at defense companies and industrial companies that support the nation's defense. No one's really talking about that. In fact, almost the opposite. Like, well, there's a Democrat in office, so those companies are going to get less money. So those might be really good purchases today. When they're needed in the future, you might be glad you made the purchase now.
Monica Canales asks you, which influential leaders do you follow to stay aware of possible trends and other indicators of future performance?
Yes. So in the book, The Prepared Investor, I specifically list out the leaders that I think everyone should be following and why. And, for me, I've got kind of two different lists of leaders. There's the ones that I put in the book that I'm trying to tell people, here's how you be prepared. And those are, for example, like the leaders of any country that has nuclear capability. You'd want to follow and know what those leaders are saying and doing. So it's a list kind of like that. But personally speaking, I have a few more people that I put onto the list. And I always get a chuckle because if I share that list, somebody's going to say, "Is that Oprah Winfrey is on your list?" And yeah, she is. I think she's had some really, really great kind, good things to offer to society. So hopefully, that gives you a chuckle at me.
Well, Pat Dolan wants to thank you for being their financial coaches. And we got one more question from my fellow Fox. He says, are you aware of what you describe as being used in any famous trials? I'm guessing other than the Nuremberg trials, where the defendant's attorneys use the concept that you described as just following orders. Are you aware of any other trials, famous trials?
Yeah, I am not aware of any. And the reason that I tend to think that there aren't any is because it was an unsuccessful defense. That was the thing that I think sparked the question in Milgram's mind, is that they all just keep coming up saying the same thing and it's getting them nowhere. Why would they keep doing this? Is it real? Could they really feel that they're just following orders? And it really perplexed him. And so that's what led to, he spent over a decade of his professional life trying to get to the bottom of what is real here? What is it? And I don't think that you would find people using the defense, I was just following orders, because it's not acceptable, to the jury.
I agree. And I was also tempted to put up a disclaimer on your behalf that you were not providing financial advice and all that good stuff, but I'm glad you covered it. One more question. Do you think the real estate market will start taking some hits because so many people are working from home?
Well, so the way that I look at real estate is that it's not a liquid market. Like, you can't just buy and sell homes on the exchange and every second of the day, we have a good idea of what a home is worth. So there's a lot more analysis, and the local knowledge of a particular community or region can make a big difference when it comes to profit. But the big trends, the big trends in my mind are that, while interest rates are low and the dollar is plentiful, real estate will continue to appreciate in value. And as interest rates rise, and if there's any kind of, constriction to the money supply, then we'll see real estate start to go the other way. There's still a lot of amazing stories of making big money in real estate with multifamily, with with even just with residential homes, like in areas like Austin. I think the last time I looked, the Austin market was a double-digit profit just in the last 6 months. So there is maybe some support of the idea that real estate's starting to peak out, and that the next move is people being left holding the bag.
More questions are rolling in. One of my fellow Foxes, David Nierberger, comments says, as we've been listening to you, the 10-year bond rate has risen to 1.5%. Are you concerned?
Yes, yeah, I sure am. So there's a great book that I would recommend anyone who's interested in reading about a debt crisis and how a nation's debt and trade surplus or deficit with other countries affects our Fed's decisions. And where we are now with the bond market, it is really an interesting time, maybe interesting in a negative way. It's nearly impossible to get any meaningful yield from a bond without paying the kind of premium that when the bond matures, you're going to say goodbye to some of that principal. And that's a tough situation to be in. And it is, in my opinion, it is a direct connection to our national debt and the expanded powers of the Fed. That might be a talk for one-on-one type discussions, but if you'd like to do some reading, let me see if I can show you the book here. This is a great book. It's called The Lost Decade. And The Lost Decade is written by a couple real smart folks. But if you look up Lost Decades on Amazon, you can really get some interesting insight into, man, I'm going to loan the government money for 10 years. I'm only going to get 1.5% per year. What is going on? It's a great resource.
And the next follow-up question, obviously, is what are your thoughts about inflation then?
I think that inflation is something that we have not had to worry about for a little while in a meaningful way. The next step is we're going to have to worry about it. The extra money that is going to exist in our country over the next few years means that inflation will be an issue. I don't think that the Fed can use its past tools to keep inflation from hurting us. I think inflation is going to be a part of our life. And it's not something to be scared of. Please don't take this like, oh gosh, inflation, we've got to go out and buy gold. No. That is definitely the people that love gold and have issues with the current affairs of the United States. No, this is still a great country. I have been all over the world. This country is a great place, and our systems are fantastic, but they're not perfect. And there is no such thing as a perfect system. There's going to be the ups and the downs. And the next move for us inflation wise is we're going to deal with inflation. I don't think that we'll deal with the same kind of dramatic trauma that was seen in the 70s, but we're going to have to deal with it. The cost of a loaf of bread is not going to be the same 5 years from now.
I think we're going to take the last question. It's from Elliot Whitney. Asks, your comment about learning from your colleagues in the midst of a typical workday is compelling. When you think about who you surround yourself with, either your team or your advisors, any tips you have about what you look for in others?
Yes. So it's hard to know what is in somebody's heart. It's hard to know from an interview really what their predisposition is. I've learned from some really smart professionals like the coach that was just mentioned earlier. Her name's Pat Dolan. But I've learned about how questionnaires and surveys can help us to see what type of a person that you are before you get hired. But even then, sometimes those matches don't work out. So for me, the thing that matters most is the phrase grit, as defined by Angela Duckworth. Dr. Duckworth did a lot of work actually at the United States Military Academy, looking at what permits people to say they're going to stay the course, what allows someone to stick to it despite the distractions, despite the hardships. And that really is the main thing that we're interested in. We can teach everything else, but if they're going to stay the course and get through whatever bad things or good things come their way without it derailing them, to us, we prize that. Really, I think alongside integrity, sometimes it's easy to forget the importance of doing the right thing regardless of who's looking. So I would mention integrity because it needs to be mentioned, but my more interesting answer is grit, and I encourage everyone to read Dr. Angela Duckworth's book of that name.
Fantastic way to end.